I don't think we've ever had this many waiver wire pickups be so fantasy viable by week 3 of a season. We have the likes of Sam Darnold, Geno Smith, Jordan Mason, J.K. Dobbins, Juwan Jennings, and Alec Pierce, all currently inside the top 10 at their position overall in fantasy football, and for the most part, they were all waiver wire pickups this season. So then the question comes up that who is the next big-time waiver wire pickup? Well, the only thing we can do is dive into week 4, and let's see what we can find. But just like always, if you're trying to find a good waiver wire pickup, you need to look at the injuries from the week prior. So this past weekend, we had a couple big time players get hurt. What about Devontae Smith? He took a vicious hit there. You can call it dirty if you want to. It wasn't really necessary. He's dealing with a concussion. He may miss this week. That's definitely something to pay attention to because we already know A.J. Brown is hurt as well. Then Sam Laporta, the tight end for the Detroit Lions. He's dealing with a low ankle sprain. He should be okay, but does it really matter at this point because dude isn't producing anything on the field. We don't need any added limitations. Then Justin Herbert. He re-injured his high ankle sprain. He's really going to see what he can do this week. Does it really affect us in fantasy football for Justin Herbert? Maybe not, but Quentin Johnston is a name we're going to be talking about here in just a little bit, and if he doesn't have Justin Herbert, that could be a problem. And then lastly, Adam Thielen. And I know a lot of people don't care about Adam Thielen in fantasy football. I probably don't really either, but he had a hamstring injury this weekend. And now with Andy Dalton under center, that passing game looks 10 times better in Carolina. We know Deontay Johnson's going to get his, but if Adam Thielen misses time, there could be another couple names in this offense we need to pay attention to. But now let's talk about 5 things we learned from week 3 so we can apply them later on in the week as well. The first one being Anthony Richardson is no longer fantasy startable until we really see this passing offense or his rushing upside return in Indianapolis. We've seen his rushing yardage go down now in 3 straight games. Way too many turnovers out there for Anthony Richardson, and only averaging 6 rush attempts per game is not going to give him a safe enough floor to really be fantasy startable, a must start weekly. The huge draw to Anthony Richardson was the rushing upside. It was the potential of the rushing touchdowns because he is not a pocket passer that's going to go out each and every week and throw for 300 yards and 2 touchdowns. So while those rushing numbers are dipping, he probably needs to dip down to the bench on a lot of people's rosters as well until we can see them turn it around. Next thing, what about Malik Neighbors? This dude cannot be stopped. 30 targets over the last 2 games, 3 touchdowns through 3 games, and he is the clear top option in this passing offense. Now, is this passing offense great? No. Daniel Jones is still tied to it. However, when you're getting that kind of volume, even if only 50% of your targets are catchable, that's going to be better than 50% of the wide receivers in the NFL. Malik Neighbors is an absolute monster. How about this? We need to expect the unexpected in 2024. Malik Willis, Andy Dalton, Daniel Jones, and Bo Nix were all top 10 quarterbacks in week 3. And there were only 4 tight ends total who scored at least 10 fantasy points. We're seeing more players than ever that no one expected to do anything finish highly each and every week. So really what this is forcing in fantasy football is for us to look a little bit deeper at every single matchup, no matter who the players are. You got to remember that fantasy football is a game of odds. There is no clear-cut formula to know exactly who to start each and every week. That's why we really focus on the matchups in our start and sit videos, and that's why you need to be checking those out each and every week as well. All right, next up, Rashee Rice may be the steal of the draft in 2024. He's had back-to-back 100-yard games. He's averaging 8 receptions a game. He's the clear number 1 target in a Patrick Mahomes-led offense. And now it looks like his legal issues aren't gonna be an issue until after the fantasy season. I put out a video early in the offseason talking about Rashee Rice being a top 10 wide receiver this year, and then the legal troubles happened and we didn't really know what to expect. That top 10 is back on the table right now, rest of season. And then lastly, Stephon Diggs makes Tank Dell borderline droppable right now in fantasy football. Diggs is averaging 8 targets a game. He just had 94 yards receiving last week alone. Tank Dell on the season, only 69 receiving yards. That's not going to cut it through 3 weeks of football. Now, this is not a definite you gotta drop Tank Dell moment, but he's definitely getting very close to the chopping block. But all right, let's go ahead and dive into the waiver wire. We're going to start off with quarterbacks first. Now, a lot of people each and every week say, hey, where do the ownership percentages come from? These ones were pulled directly off of Sleeper, so if you don't like it, send him an email or something. I don't know what to tell you, but there are a few guys in today's show. They're going to be a little bit more highly owned. Just go out there and check to see if they're available in your league. If they're not, just move on to the next guy on the list. But for the quarterback position, we're going back to Caleb Williams, who's currently owned in 66% of leagues, but next week he plays the Los Angeles Rams. But what's most important is we just saw last weekend what happens to Caleb Williams when he actually pushes the ball down the field a little bit more. His yards per completion went from 7.2 yards in the first 2 games of the season to over 11 yards in week 3, and it's because he really started to utilize Roma Dunze a little bit more in this offense. Not on top of that, though, the Rams can't really stop people through the air. We could see Caleb Williams with another verge ceiling game in week 4. What about Sam Darnold, currently owned in 39% of leagues, going to Green Bay on the road to face the Packers? And this really started off as a good story, but has all of a sudden turned into, damn, Sam Darnold is a legit fantasy quarterback. Right now, he is the quarterback 2 overall in fantasy football, averaging just about 20 fantasy points per game, all while facing the likes of the San Francisco 49ers and the Houston Texans. Now he goes up against Green Bay, and Will Levis, he just threw for 260 yards and 2 touchdowns against this defense. Sam Darnold could easily do the same thing. What about Geno Smith, currently owned in 40% of leagues, with a matchup this week against the Detroit Lions in Detroit? Now, the ceiling, it may not be as high as a Caleb Williams or a Sam Darnold, but there is something to say about consistency when it comes to fantasy football. Right now, Geno is playing great. He's completing over 70% of his passes in all 3 games this season. He's averaging at least 1 touchdown each and every week, and we already know that Detroit is easier to throw on than run on, so Geno Smith is an option here in week 4. And then lastly, Andy Dalton. Are we talking about a Carolina Panther on the waiver wire show? Yes, we are. He's only owned in 7% of leagues. Now he's going up against the Cincinnati Bengals at home in Carolina, and I think it's obvious now, maybe Bryce Young just isn't that good, because Andy Dalton came in and just threw for 319 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions in week 3. Bryce Young, through the first 2 weeks of the season, had only 245 total passing yards, no passing touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. And now we get Andy Dalton going back to Cincinnati to face his old team. Is he going to be a top 12 option? Probably not, but for those of you who start 2 quarterbacks or a super flex league, if you have a struggling starter, Andy Dalton may not be a bad option in week 4. Which will then transition us over to running backs. Let's start off with Braylon Allen of the New York Jets. Only 46% owned as of right now, which is a little bit shocking to me. They have a matchup this coming up week against the Denver Broncos, and really, the great play as of late for Braylon Allen is leading to more weekly touches, even though Breece Hall is healthy. His touches have gone up in 3 straight ball games. He's averaging over 5 yards per carry, and now they're facing the Denver Broncos, who have allowed over 126 yards rushing per game on the season. Now, I don't want to say he's startable each and every week, but honestly, if anything happens to Breece Hall, could end up being a league winner for those who have him on the bench. Then we go down to Bucky Irving. He's still only owned in 44% of leagues, and really, I have no idea why. Everyone knows at this point that Rachaad White is not the most efficient runner on the ground. He really makes his money in the pass-catching game. But we also know that he's dealing with a groin injury, which means more touches for Bucky Irving. When he gets more touches, he looks really good. He's averaging over 6 yards per carry. His touches each and every week are increasing, and now in 2 of the 3 games played this season, we've seen him bust off a big play of at least 30 yards. We could definitely see his role increase, and if anything happens to Rachaad White, another guy that would be fantasy startable right away. How about Chuba Hubbard? He's owned in 61% of leagues, but why hasn't Chuba really been a fantasy option to start the season? It's because that offense was garbage with Bryce Young under center. They weren't scoring touchdowns. They were falling behind super early. They were having to abandon the run super early in both ball games. But when you have a quarterback that can throw the ball down the field with success, it opens up running lanes everywhere, like we saw for Chuba Hubbard in week 3. Now that we know we're going to have Andy Dalton, Chuba Hubbard becomes a RB3 option for your fantasy team, a flex play if needed, a matchup this upcoming week against the Cincinnati Bengals. Which then takes us down to Cam Akers of the Houston Texans with a matchup this week going up against Jacksonville. Now, he's currently 58% owned. A lot of people picked him up last week due to the injury of Joe Mixon, but let's be honest, Cam Akers isn't great, right? I'm sorry, I'm not a Cam Akers truther. But with Joe Mixon injured, if he misses more time, Cam Akers is the handcuff to own. The entire reason he really struggled in week 3 was Houston got absolutely torched, so they really couldn't run the ball much. Now, while I don't love Cam Akers, if you can pick him up and have him on your bench and Joe Mixon were to miss another game, maybe you have a low-end flex option, maybe you're in a multiple flex league, that's when I look at Cam Akers. If he's your RB1 or RB2, RIP your fantasy team. And then Emmanuel Wilson of the Green Bay Packers, only owned in 6% of leagues, and now he has a matchup going up against Minnesota. Really, this one is not so much of a, hey, let's pick him up and throw him in our lineup, even though he had a good week 3. This has everything to do with Marshawn Lloyd being injured and us really needing to own Josh Jacobs' backup. Because what we saw in week 3 really wasn't a fluke. 85 total yards and a touchdown for Emmanuel Wilson. If he gets put into a position where he's seeing 15 plus touches a week, he's going to be fantasy viable. The last thing you want to do is own Josh Jacobs and not have Emmanuel Wilson right now. Because I will tell you this, if Josh Jacobs were to go down, Emmanuel Wilson would be one of, if not the top waiver wire pickup the following week. Which will then take us to some ball catchers. We're talking wide receivers, and there's quite a few here. I think Juwan Jennings is going to be on the top of everyone's list right now, currently owned in 43% of leagues. Going up against New England this upcoming week, he exploded in week 3, right? With no Christian McCaffrey, no George Kittle, no Deebo Samuel. We saw Juwan Jennings go out there and get 12 targets, 11 catches, 175 yards, and 3 tutties. Now, I'm hoping that if you're a member of this channel, you saw our post later in the week last week when we knew we weren't going to have George Kittle. Mac made Juwan Jennings one of his late week lottery tickets, so a lot of people, hopefully you grabbed him and threw him into your lineup here this week. But then we go down the likes of Quentin Johnson for the Los Angeles Chargers, currently owned in 63% of leagues. Now he's going up against Kansas City. He's found a way to get in the end zone the last couple of weeks, but really, he's not putting up huge numbers. He hasn't had more than 5 receptions or 51 yards receiving in a game yet, and now we know that Justin Herbert has re-aggravated that ankle issue. Now, with Josh Palmer hurt, that still props up Quentin Johnston, but if Justin Herbert were to miss, we could see a slight reduction in production for Quentin Johnston. Then we go down to Xavier Legette of the Carolina Panthers, another Panther in the show, only owned in 35% of leagues, and he's coming off the highest number of snaps he's played in a game so far this season. But what I really like here is Adam Thielen is dealing with a hamstring injury, and we know that Andy Dalton can move the ball down the field. Xavier Legette wants more deep ball opportunities. He's a yak monster, yards after the catch, and if we don't have Adam Thielen, added targets could be a good thing here this week. Then we go down to Demario Douglas of the New England Patriots, only owned in 14% of leagues, going up against the San Francisco 49ers, and we really saw his target share return in week 3. Now, he should be the leading target receiver in this offense each and every week. No doubt about that. The problem is the ceiling is probably still going to be a little bit lower because they don't score a whole lot of touchdowns in New England. Maybe a safer full PPR type guy than a guy that we can go out there and rely on winning you a matchup. What about Allen Lazard of the New York Jets in a matchup going up against Denver? He's currently 40% owned, and it's apparent that Aaron Rodgers is going to look the way of Allen Lazard more so than Mike Williams. Now, Lazard going to be a little bit more touchdown dependent, but we could see more targets this upcoming week because Garrett Wilson is going to be covered by Patrick Surtain, who has just been shutting down wide receivers all season long. Then we go down to Rome Odunze of the Chicago Bears. Now, he is owned in 82% of leagues, but there are a few leagues out there where he is available because he didn't really do much the first 2 weeks of the season. Now, a great matchup going up against the Rams. It was really just always a volume issue with Rome Odunze, not a talent issue. If he got opportunities, he was going to score points. But with that volume that he got last week, 11 targets, he turned it into 6 catches for 112 yards and a touchdown. Now he's going against the Rams, who can definitely be had through the air, and Keenan Allen still isn't 100% healthy. Then we go down to Jahan Dotson of the Philadelphia Eagles, only owned in 17% of leagues, in a matchup going up against Tampa Bay. We know A.J. Brown is hurt. Devontae Smith is in the concussion protocol, which means someone has to catch balls in Philadelphia against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This could be the opportunity for Jahan Dotson in this offense. Then we go down to Tutu Atwell, only owned in 7% of leagues, going up against the Bears. We talked about him in this show last week, and then it happened again. With Kupp and Puka out, Tutu is able to showcase his big playability. He's averaging 23 yards per reception and is going to continue to get chances like that each and every week that Puka and Kupp are out. But then we need to talk about Darnell Mooney. Who wants to go full Mooney out there in Headliner Nation? Currently 43% owned in a matchup going up against the New Orleans Saints. And all of a sudden, Big Kirko in Atlanta has found his binky. And no, it's not Drake London. No, it's not Kyle Pitts. It's Darnell Mooney. 8 targets, 8 receptions, 66 yards. Has had at least 7 targets now in back-to-back games, and so much defensive attention is going to be looking at Drake London and Kyle Pitts that Darnell Mooney is finding room to operate all over the field. And then lastly, it's Ricky Pearsall of the San Francisco 49ers, currently owned in 21% of leagues. Now, no, he's not going to help your team this week. He is scheduled to return the following week in week 5. Now, we know him and Brock Purdy had a great connection in the offseason, and if San Francisco is still dealing with injuries in week 5, we could see Ricky Pearsall getting a ton of targets right away. But like I said, he's not going to help you in week 4, but you can stash him a week early just in case. Now we can go to tight ends. I'll be honest, there's not a lot to talk about. The tight end position is an absolute wasteland in fantasy football right now. We got Tyler Conklin, we got Noah Fant, both of them under 20% owned as of right now. Both of them coming off decent week 3 games. The problem is, they didn't do really anything the 2 weeks prior to that. It's not like we can look at either one of these guys as somebody who's safe and reliable and able to just be started for a safe floor weekly. Right now, even the stud tight ends are not safe to start weekly. However, when it comes to who's available out there in the majority of leagues, if you're desperate for somebody, these are probably the 2 guys that maybe have the best opportunity at a quote-unquote safer floor. We can then transition over to defensive special teams. Same type of thing here. Not a lot of great options this upcoming week when we're looking at overall matchups. We got the Arizona Cardinals. They're only 2% owned. They're going up against Washington. Now, obviously, Washington hasn't played yet in week 3, but what we have seen so far this season is they're struggling to find the end zone. Remember, when we're trying to find defensive matchups, we want those matchups against those opposing teams that really struggle scoring points. Then next up, we got the Titans as well, going up against Miami. Skylar Thompson has looked horrible. Do they make a move to Tyler Huntley? Maybe. We don't even know for sure yet, but what we do know is this Titans defense got taken advantage of in week 3, and they're really not that bad. If they can get a Skylar Thompson-led offense in Miami, they're going to have a great chance at bouncing back in week 4. Which means the only thing we have left to talk about is a few players that I feel comfortable in dropping when it comes to your fantasy football team. And I would love for this list to be a little bit longer, but with all the injuries and all the inconsistent play from some studs, there's not a lot of guys that you want to just give up on right now. Mike Williams is definitely one of them, though. He's owned in 32% of leagues. We see Allen Lazard and Garrett Wilson and now Tyler Conklin getting the lion's share of targets there. Mike Williams, kind of an afterthought. Tyler Boyd, even though his former head coach, new head coach, whatever you want to call him there in Tennessee, Brian Callahan came along, he's not seeing an increased target share, and now DeAndre Hopkins is getting healthier. And then Josh Palmer, he's 37% owned still. Quentin Johnston and Ladd McConkey are the guys to own in LA, and plus we're dealing with a Justin Herbert injury, and Palmer himself not 100% healthy either. Now, obviously everyone's league is different. Some people are going to have some of these players available, some will not. But that's why we stay active in the comment section here on YouTube. Now, as much as I would like to read through paragraph-long comments, we don't have that much time, so if you can keep your questions a little bit shorter, should I drop so-and-so for so-and-so, I can try to help you out as much as I possibly can. Now, the first few weeks of this season has been absolutely crazy, but this is what makes fantasy football fun. If it was always predictable, if it was always just vanilla, we would get bored with it. It's the game keeping us on our toes like this that makes a ton of people fall in love with fantasy football in the first place. Now, if you enjoyed today's show, do me a favor, hit the like button if you haven't already, and consider subscribing even though we're all the way to week 4. It's not too late, and I promise if you subscribe, I'll drop bangers. But I'm gonna go ahead and get out of here today. Hopefully you enjoy the rest of your day, but most importantly, do your part to make the world a better place.